All right, so today we're going deep into Balinese politics.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, but not the kind of stuff you see in the headlines.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're talking about the Puri.
The royal houses.
Exactly.
I mean, they're still around, right? You see them in ceremonies and festivals.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
That's what we're here to figure out.
All ears.
We're really lucky to have this amazing thesis from the University of Indonesia.
That's a great resource for this kind of deep dive.
Yeah, and we've got some historical accounts and even interviews with Puri figures.
Wow, first-hand insights. That's fantastic.
And the period we're focusing on is really key, from Indonesia's independence all the way through the years after Suharto.
The post-Suharto era, that's when things really started to change.
Right, so the big question is, did the Puri lose their power?
Or did they just, kind of shift it around, become more behind-the-scenes players?
That's the million-dollar question.
I think to really understand it, we need to start with independence in 1945.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Completely reshaped Indonesia's power structures.
And for the Puri, I bet it was a pretty intense time.
Oh, absolutely. They had to figure out how to survive in this new Indonesia.
The thesis mentions this group called the Parmanagung, or Great Council.
Oh, yeah, I've read about that.
It formed right after independence.
It was a pretty dramatic moment.
Like something out of a movie.
It brought together all the rulers of Bali's kingdoms.
Wow, all in one room.
Trying to decide what their place would be in this new Indonesia.
I bet there were some pretty heated debates.
Oh, yeah, and you know what's interesting?
What's that?
Some Puri figures were actually pro-Dutch.
Real?
Yeah, they wanted to stay part of the Dutch East Indies.
Wow, talk about a divided house.
Right. It shows just how complex the situation was.
So, were there any particular people who really embody this whole clash of ideologies?
Absolutely. The thesis highlights one case in particular, Anak Agung Gede Agung,
And he was from Benin.
Puri Gianyar.
Okay, what's his story?
Well, first, he was the prime minister of the state of East Indonesia.
Wait, East Indonesia?
Yeah, it was a pro-Dutch state.
Oh, wow.
But then, get this, later on, he was imprisoned by Sukarno.
No way.
Yes, accused of being involved in a coup attempt.
So, from leading a pro-Dutch state to being jailed by Indonesia's first president.
That's right. Quite the journey.
It really makes you think about the Puri's approach to power, doesn't it?
They were definitely adaptable, that's for sure.
Always trying to figure out the best angle.
Exactly. Always reevaluating their allegiances, their strategies.
It really challenges that image of them as just symbolic figureheads.
They were active players on the political stage, no doubt.
Okay, so after Indonesia secured full independence, what happened then?
Well, things get even more interesting in the post-Suharto era, the Reformasi period.
Yeah, that was a time of huge change for Indonesia.
And for Bali, too.
So how did the Puri navigate all of this?
The thesis looks at two regencies, Klungkung and Gianyar, to show how the Puri's influence evolved differently.
Okay, two different paths.
Yeah, fascinating to compare them.
So let's start with Klungkung.
Okay, so Klungkung.
What's significant about that region in relation to the Puri?
Well, it's home to Puri Agung Klungkung.
And that's?
It's considered the oldest Puri in Bali.
Oh, wow. So steeped in history.
Yeah, it holds a really important place in Balinese tradition.
But you said something about them losing political ground.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting.
What happened?
In 2003, a non-Puri figure was elected regent.
So someone outside the royal family took over.
Exactly, a pretty big shift.
Yeah, it does seem like a decline in the Puri's power.
Right. It makes you wonder what led to that change.
Like, did the people just kind of turn their backs on the royal family?
Well, it's complicated, but the thesis delves into the story of Kokorda Rakaputra.
Okay, who's that?
He's from Puri Klungkung, and in 2008, he ran for regent as an independent.
So he was trying to win back the regency for the royal family.
In a way, yes.
What was his strategy?
He played on nostalgia, harking back to the Puri's glorious past.
Like, make Klungkung great again.
Kind of, yeah. He presented himself as someone who would restore the Puri's rightful place.
So did it work? Did people buy into that?
Sadly for him, no. He lost the election.
So maybe that's a turning point for the Puri in Klungkung.
It definitely highlights the changing political landscape there.
Like the growing influence of people outside the Puri.
Exactly. And it shows that the Puri had to adapt.
Yeah, they couldn't just rely on their name anymore.
Right. They had to figure out new ways to operate.
Okay, so Klungkung was kind of a tough story for the Puri.
Yeah, but you mentioned Gianyar was different, right?
Right. Gianyar tells a different story.
Okay, I'm ready for some good news.
Well, in Gianyar, The Puri managed to hold on to some political power.
Really? How'd they do that?
The 2008 Regency election there is a great example.
Okay, tell me more.
The winner was Kokorda Oka Artha Ardana Sukawati.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, he's known as Kokes,
Cookies, got it.
and he's from Puri Ubud.
Okay, so another Puri figure.
But what's amazing is he beat a candidate backed by the dominant political party.
That's a huge upset.
Right. So how did he pull it off?
He ran a really smart campaign.
Okay, what was his secret?
He blended a modern vision with appeals to the Puri's traditional legacy.
So he didn't shy away from his royal background.
No, but he also showed he was forward-thinking.
Interesting. It's like he found a way to balance the old and the new.
Exactly, and it clearly worked because he won.
So even though Gianyar shows a different outcome for the Puri, it still seems like a delicate balance.
Absolutely. It's a constant dance between tradition and modernity.
And it makes Balinese politics so fascinating.
Definitely keeps you on your toes.
Okay, so we've seen how the Puri's power played out in Klungkung and Gianyar.
Two very different stories.
Yeah, but they both raise this question. Is the Puri's power real?
Or is it just like perception and legacy?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is, and it's something we'll dig into more in the next part of our deep dive.
So make sure to tune in for that.
We'll be exploring the different views on the Puri's power.
And looking at how history itself can be used to shape those views.
It's going to get really interesting.
That way.
Me neither. It's a question of relevance, isn't it? Like, do the Puris still matter in today's Bali?
Right, like we were saying, some people resent their influence.
Yeah, and others seem to admire them.
What makes the difference? Why do people feel so differently about them?
Well, one big thing is this idea of modernization versus tradition.
Makes sense. Bali's changing so fast.
Yeah, and for some people, the Puris are like symbols of a bygone era.
Holding back progress.
Yeah, they think the Puris are stuck in the past.
Clinging to old systems of power.
And privilege.
Right. And that plays into the economic side of things too, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, the thesis mentioned that the Puris often own a lot of land.
And resources.
Yeah, while many ordinary Balinese are struggling.
It's that classic tension, isn't it?
The haves and the have-nots.
Exactly, but with this added layer of history on top of it.
But it's not all negative, though, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
The thesis also talks about the respect that many Balinese still have for the Puri.
Yeah, they see them as protectors,
Keepers of tradition.
patrons of the arts.
Yeah, they play this dual role.
Symbols of the past, but also guardians of Balinese culture.
It's interesting how those two things can coexist.
Right, it's like they embody this continuity.
Speaking of culture, I'm thinking about tourism.
Oh, yeah, huge in Bali.
And the Puri, they contribute to that, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Those unique cultural elements are a big draw for tourists.
And the Puris are often seen as the ones keeping those traditions alive.
Exactly. So their cultural role ties into the economic side of things, too.
It's all connected.
It is. It's this whole web of cultural, economic, and political factors.
Makes it tricky to understand the Puri's power.
It does. It's why these case studies are so helpful.
Like Klungkung and Gianyar.
Right. One where the Puri lost ground, one where they held on.
Maybe we should dive into those a bit more.
Let's do it. Klungkung first.
Okay, so what went wrong for the Puri there? What were the key factors?
Well, one thing the thesis points out is their economic power, or lack thereof.
Okay, so they weren't as wealthy as some of the other Puri.
Exactly, unlike in Gianyar.
So they couldn't really support their traditional role?
As patrons, protectors.
Right, and did that feed into this idea that they were out of touch?
Oh, absolutely.
The thesis mentions this concept of status bias in Klungkung.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What does that even mean?
Basically, some people think the Puris are arrogant,
Oh, wow.
out of touch with the everyday realities of people.
Stuck in their ivory tower.
Kind of, yeah. And it probably made it easier for a non-Puri figure to get elected.
Yeah, like in 2003 when that happened.
Exactly. It was a sign that people wanted change.
A leader who understood their struggles.
Right. Someone more relatable.
So the Puri in Klungkung, they just couldn't keep up with the times.
It seems that way.
But then we have Gianyar, a different story.
Right. Remember Kokes?
The guy who won in 2008.
Yeah. He's a great example of a new generation of Puri leaders.
More in tune with modern Bali.
Exactly. He knew how to blend his modern vision with that traditional legacy.
And it worked. People responded to that.
They did.
Yeah.
And he was smart about using the Puri's existing power, too.
Like their involvement in tourism.
Exactly. The thesis talks about that.
Makes them look good, right?
Oh, definitely. It shows they're contributing to the economy.
not just living off the past.
Right. They're actively involved in shaping Bali's future.
It's a good strategy.
It is, and it seems to be working for them.
But even in Gianyar, it's not a guaranteed win for the Puri, is it?
No, you're right.
What about India?
Oh, yeah, the guy who lost in 2012.
What happened there?
It shows that even with a good strategy, politics is unpredictable.
So what went wrong?
Well, the thesis suggests he might have been too close to the previous administration.
Oh, so it wasn't about him being from a Puri.
Not really. It was more about the specific political context.
So even if you're from a royal family, you still have to play the game, right?
You do. You can't just coast on your name.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's like the Puri's power is real.
But it's not unlimited.
Exactly. They have to adapt, evolve.
Engage with what's happening in Balinese society.
If they don't, they'll get left behind.
Makes sense.
It's a survival tactic.
So we've talked about how the Puri's power is real, but limited.
And how they have to adapt to survive.
But there's another layer to this whole power thing, isn't there?
You're thinking about pseudo-history.
Exactly. That idea that some Puri might be twisting the narrative.
To make themselves look better?
Yeah, it's kind of a mind-blowing concept.
It is. Makes you question everything you thought you knew.
You know, it's like what we're seeing all over the world, isn't it?
What do you mean?
This clash between the old and the new.
Oh, yeah.
Tradition versus progress.
It happens everywhere.
It makes you think about Settery, you know?
In what way?
Like, how do we balance respecting the past with moving forward?
Not an easy question.
Not at all. But maybe the Balinese case study can teach us something.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, the Puris that are doing well, they seem to have found a way.
A way to what?
To bridge that gap between the past and present.
Right, they're not stuck in the past.
Exactly. They've adapted.
And modernized their image.
Embraced new opportunities.
Yeah, and they're really focused on the needs of modern Bali.
It's pretty smart when you think about it.
It is. They're not just relying on their titles.
They're showing their value.
Proving they're still relevant.
And then there's that whole pseudo-history thing.
Oh, yeah.
That idea that some Puri might be, I don't know.
Embellishing their history.
Yeah, making themselves look better.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is. It makes you wonder if we can ever really know the truth about the past.
Good point.
And it shows how history can be used, you know.
Used for what?
As a tool to influence people.
Oh, absolutely.
We see it all the time, don't we?
All the time.
So where does this leave the Puri? What's their future in Bali?
I think it depends.
On what?
On whether they can stay relevant.
Like we were saying, connect with people's needs.
Contribute to Bali's economy.
Keep that cultural flame burning.
Yeah. If they can do that, they have a chance.
But it's not going to be a walk in the park, right?
No, it's a tough challenge.
They can't just rely on their name and their history.
They have to keep evolving.
Finding new ways to be important.
It's like any institution, really.
Yeah, you have to adapt or die.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
Learned so much about Bali.
Me too.
Especially about the Puri.
Such a complex story.
It is. And it makes you realize that the past is never really over. It's always shaping the present.
In ways we don't even realize.
Right, so we have to understand it.
To make sense of the world.
Exactly. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our journey.
Our Balinese adventure.
It's time to say goodbye to the Puri. For now, at least.
Until next time.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.